Hey, it's Fungal, and I'm going to be doing a quick team review of every single team in the LDL Draft League. This is just meant to be like a for fun educational thing where I go over every team and then state my thoughts on it, like its strengths and weaknesses, so on. Just really simple. I'm going to start off here. This is Pick's team. Right off the bat, we have a really strong offensive core: Scizor, Chien-Pao, Landorus. These Chien-Pao and Landorus are going to be extremely hard to switch into. They're very strong wall breakers. You can also double as sweepers and revenge killers too. Landorus can run Choice Scarf. Chien-Pao is obviously blazing fast and has priority. Can run ST. Landorus can run Rock Polish. These two mons are extremely threatening. Scizor is an amazing mon. Can run ST and Sweep. You can run Curse, boosts its defense. Could be a bulky pivot with Roost and U-turn. Can even run Knockoff. Scizor can do whatever it wants. These three just make an insanely powerful core. And then Skeletor and Lola, they pair really well with Scizor's great fire resists, both bulky water and a bulky fire. So that any sort of attacks aimed at this Scizor, you'll be able to shrug off with this amazing core. Especially since Alola does have flip turn, so pairing that with Scizor, you have flip turn, you have slow U-turn. You get in these powerful breakers like Pao and Landorus extremely easily. And these 5 bonds already, just an insanely good start for Pick. But after that, there's the mons here don't seem to do too much in particular. Weezing's a decent fairy type, decent bulky fairy type. Neutralizing Gas, Levitate can help obviously. Does have Defog, has some nice utility. Electrode is very fast, but Pick's team doesn't especially need the speed here. If anything, it just kind of helps with the fast Volt Turn core. But I don't see Electrode actually doing too much with this sort of team. Iron Boulder here. A really nice, fast, cleaner sweeper, but again, this team doesn't really need that with the double priority with the speed of Chien-Pao. Obviously, Rock Polish and Landorus can clean up too. Iron Boulder doesn't really seem to be doing that much on its own here that these other guys can't. Duraludon and Oricorio are decent budget picks. Oricorio can be a good defog or Quiver Dance Sweeper. Duraludon can be a nice emergency check. Medivai Light, set up rocks, Draco Meteor, all that sort of thing. Already this is, I think, one of the strongest teams we have here, definitely one of my favorites. In terms of weaknesses, it doesn't have the greatest switch-ins to strong ground-type moves. Landorus obviously not the greatest ground-type switch-in. Weezing can Levitate, sure, Alola, but in general, any really strong sort of banded ground type like Banded Landorus can really put a hole in this team if it just clicks Earthquake a lot and maybe gets off some strong Stone Edges on this other Landorus and this Weezing trying to switch in, because neither of them have any sort of recovery. And the only other problem I really have with this team is in terms of hazards. This team cannot really deal too well with them. It's kind of hazard weak where it's forced to run heavy duty boots on a lot of these mons, and the defog options aren't that great. Weezing has no recovery, has no pivot move, and it doesn't appreciate holding boots because it really wants all that black sludge to get that recovery. Oricorio is not very bulky at all. Scizor would very often run an offensive set. Landorus too. They both much prefer running offensive sets and slotting defog and running a sort of defensive pivot set onto their onto a moveset. But other than those problems, I really like this team. It's definitely, I think, one of the at least top 3, probably even the best one here. Next up, we have the bulky balanced team, not the S word. To start off, I usually don't like super bulky, I don't like super stall teams in draft a lot because a lot of times you just see good opponents sort of counter your whole strategy. They bring mons that can abuse your really passive walls like Toxapex, like Blissey, like Quagsire. They bring taunts, they bring sub, and then they just sit up on these things and then they just sweep the rest of your team. But I feel like this is an exception to that rule because of how versatile these 3 of these mons here are. It's Landorus, Mega Latias, and also the Silvally. So starting off, Landorus, obviously it can do anything it wants, from choice sets to defensive sets, even sweeper sets, physical or special, it can run any of them. Landorus is definitely an all-star in drafts, and here it's definitely going to shine. And Mega Latias obviously is super versatile too. It can live basically any single hit in the game. It's super bulky, it's super fast, it's super strong. It has setup options: Calm Mind, Dragon Dance, Recover, Refresh, Magic Coat, Reflect type, Ice Beam, Thunder Wave, whatever you want to run on it. It can run that move. It can just be really specific into certain teams and just deal with a lot of the threats you have. In particular, it can run Roar. And then Silvally obviously can run any type it wants. It could be Fairy, it could be normal, it could be Ice, it could be Ground, even Fire. And these three provide a lot of offensive pressure into teams that might try to abuse the defensive side of this, and this makes it a very potent sort of balanced core. And what I especially like and why I think we probably shouldn't have allowed the Mega Latias is that you actually get the regular form too. So this Latias does not have to be Mega. You can bring it with some sort of like choice set. You can run Trick. You can just outspeed things that think they would outspeed your Mega version and just hit them with like a Choice Scarf Draco. You can go for like Spec Side Shock, something like that. And you can even run some sort of weakness policy set. You think Latias is gonna Mega, you click U-turn, then all of a sudden weakness policy comes out, agility comes out, and then this thing is sweeping you with stored power or a spear, whatever it wants. Something else I really like about this team is the fact that it can hazard stack extremely well. Houndstone is a great great spin blocker. The team has a plethora of hazards in terms of T-spikes, rocks, spikes. They have all of the hazards. They have lots of basically hazard kind of immune mons in this Mega Latias and Landorus. They already don't need to wear boots. They only take 12% from stealth rocks, which is great. A lot of these mons will hold boots anyway. But that brings us to the problem with this team. One, it's kind of slow. Uval Latias can try to bring back some of the speed for the team. They have 125, 110. This team hits decent speed tiers, but it doesn't hit enough of them essentially. And it's going to find itself actually wanting a Scarfer, I think, pretty often, or like Bandit, Ice Shard on Reval to deal with a lot of threats. And a problem that arises, another one, with in terms of hazard stack, is that you can just get counter hazard stack. Your opponent can bring hazards of their own, and then you have real trouble dealing with them. The only spinner here is Avalugg, and Avalugg is not going to want to come every match. It's not an excellent mon. So if your opponent's bringing opposing hazard stack into you, then you're going to have a lot of trouble with that, because they just bring knockoff. You knock off some of your boots, you start taking rocks chip. Quagsire will hate getting toxic poisoned. T-Spike, Silvally too. And the problem with Silvally is that you actually don't have a fairy type, so versus teams with strong dragons might be forced to bring fairy type Silvally a lot, and that obviously can't hold heavy duty boots. So versus a team like that, I would just get up my toxic spikes on something like Pex so they can't absorb them by switching back in, so they'll have to switch out first, and then just start throwing off dragon moves and force Silvally to come in and get poisoned, and then eventually I'll be able to just wear down this team. But other than that, I really like the hazard tech core with Weavile and all these other knockoff abusers to get rid of boots, and also just a really potent sort of flexible offensive core. Just come off of this really bulky defensive core is really amazing. Next, Mega Alakazam. Enough said. Mega Alakazam plus Psychic Terrain is kind of one of the auto win conditions, and it's just really hard to beat that in general, especially if this like Donphan, this Visitipity, they get up hazard versus you. This Quillfish is, you're gonna have a lot of trouble dealing with these things both defensively and offensively. And this team does have a decent amount of natural bulk. Donphan, Visitipity, Landorus, H-Slash, Cinderace, these can all run relatively bulky sets. They can live lots of hits, and they can also hit you back really hard. So this finds itself being a very offensive team, but not super frail like most hyper offense would be. So a great start offensively, but I'm not actually loving it defensively very much at all. One, your only ghost resist is this Indeedee, and that's not something you can fall back on very often when the rest of your team is basically weak to it or neutral. And you don't have great natural bulk in the special department aside from Serendipity. And also, in terms of ground resists, you have Thunderous, you have Hawlucha. That's about all. Everything else here kind of crumples to strong Earthquakes, and neither of these will be wanting to switch into any sort of coverage those ground types have. Because they're not the bulkiest, they don't have the greatest recovery. So you're going to always want to be bringing a super offensive variant of this team every week. And it's not particularly bad, but especially since you have only one really slow bulky pivot in Serendipity. The only other option is kind of Hawlucha. You're not going to be able to bring really bulky, bouncy teams to try to abuse more defensive teams. You're just going to have to try to muscle through them every week. The last problem I have is that Qwilfish doesn't really do anything for this team. Sure, it has spikes, it has T-spikes, but those are going to be really easy to get rid of. Defog's also going to get rid of your Psychic terrain. You have basically nothing to punish Defog or kind of de-incentivize it. Or you don't even have a spin blocker either, no ghost type, so these hazards aren't going to do much. This isn't going to do much defensively either. It doesn't have flip turn or anything. But other than that, this team will be really threatening offensively. Next up, Chew and Dracovish already is probably one of the best potent offensive wall-breaking cores in the game. These two are incredibly difficult to switch into on their own. Both of them together is near impossible. Especially with the kind of support they have here with Mega Diancie to prevent hazard from blowing up. Golden Go plus webs, spikes, rocks from this Fortress, from this Masquerain, from the Stakataka. And your own pretty decent spinners in Terrapagos and Fortress is going to make sure you win the hazard game, and then you keep attacking with these two really big wall breakers. You even have some very versatile mods like Golden Go, setup sweepers like Dragonite, Slowbro, and even Stakataka can sweep with Trick Room. So on the surface, with what I've said so far, it's a really powerful team, but it's lacking a key component, I think, and for a sort of bouncy team where you're trying to get in these wall breakers, trying to play the hazard game, one big issue I have is that this team does not have a way of pivoting those things in at all. Chew doesn't have a pivot move, Dracovish doesn't, Gold doesn't, Diancie doesn't. The only bonds here with pivot moves are Masquerain with U-turn and Fortress with Volt Switch, which aren't very reliable at all. They don't have really any recovery. So it brings your team to a sort of point where, yes, you have these really powerful wall breakers, you have amazing support for them, but you just can't get them in more than once per game without just losing them on every time, and you're just going to end up trading instead of getting a kill, resetting, and that's one problem they have with the team. Another problem here is the speed tiers. I think 110, 100, and then all the way down to 84, so on. You have very slow mons in general, and that's going to be an issue if you can't get up webs, or if they have flying mons or heavy-duty boots. You're going to be forced to run Choice Scarf a lot, and I think that's going to be pretty predictable, pretty detrimental to the team. But despite that, this team is still going to be extremely scary to face because of these starting five. You really can't have too solid a game plan into any of them. They can all just totally bowl you over. Next is a team that I actually like a lot, despite it not being not being too standard. Bikini, Meow Superior. Starting off, like, there's great speed tiers here. You get all the benchmarks. Jolteon, Meow Superior, Ninetales. Lots of great speeds here. You be forcing your opponents to have trouble deciding what they want to outspeed, what they can let outspeed them. You're not going to give them extra EV points to spare, which is great. Also, this team looks great at keeping the offensive momentum. Bikini forces kills, could use U-turn. Meowscrot does the same. Superior with Glare. A9 could run something like Hypnosis, Encore, Veil, even Nasty Plot, Blizzard. Suicune's a potent, very good win con. Kildeo's flip turn. So this team will be great at keeping offensive momentum. But one thing I have with this team, one problem I have, is that it has basically zero chances. If you don't have the momentum, you're basically pretty likely to lose them on. Because even though some of these bonds have okay natural bulk, like Mega Mawile, these aren't going to be able to switch into more than one attack. So if your opponent just keep attacking, don't let you keep the momentum, then you're going to have a lot of issues. And also you're going to have trouble abusing this Veil because you don't have great setup sweepers. So we could use Calm Mind Sure, kill the O2, but Victini won't be setting up, Meow won't be setting up. A lot of these in general would just be want to keep clicking attacks, and your Veil doesn't benefit that much. But despite that, the team's just incredible speed and the fast momentum it can keep with these very strong attackers is certainly something to watch out for. Next up is, I think, one of the other contenders for the best team, and it's Electric Train. Of course it is. Normally, when thinking about draft teams, I'd say to avoid I try to tell people to avoid sticking to one gimmick for their team a lot. Like, don't spec too hard into side terrain, don't spec too hard into Trick Room, because you want to be able to leave your options open. Make sure your rain team can work outside of rain too, for if they bring Sunny Day or something. Make sure your Psychic Terrain team works. If they bring a bunch of Ice Spinners, they bring their own terrains. Make sure your Trick Room team can outspeed your opponent if you don't want to bring full-on Trick Room one game. But Electric Train, I think, here is very different because all of these spawns are super strong in their own right. Iron Moth, Iron Leaves, Cocoa Bundle, Treads, none of these things need the Electric Train actually to work on their own. They're just very powerful by themselves without that support. And the support from the Electric Train is just what makes them go from very powerful to astronomically dangerous. And beyond that, this team has some great bulky pivots, Iron Treads and Moltres. Iron Treads is amazing rapid spin support. These sorts of teams are always very weak to hazards, but having Iron Treads means that you at least have a lot of buffer against hazard stacking and rocks. Whereas if you didn't have that, I think you definitely need some sort of magic bouncer or something like Hattery and Mega Sableye to deal with that. But because of Treads, you're in a good spot here. You won't be forced to bring Defog, Cocoa, Defog, Moltres every round. Moltres is also a great U-turn pivot. Could deal with lots of physical threats, could deal with opposing U-turn spam. Because of that flame body, they'll be very de-insensitive to click that. I think here I don't really think low kicks is great on this team. You don't need the revenge killing options when you do have Leaves, Moth, and Bundle as basically some of the best revenge killers in the game if they quirk speed up. And also Scarf Tracheon, so I don't think low kick's going to be doing too much here. Tracheon, I think, is a very cool pick for this sort of team. When it could be a very strong wall breaker, it could be also a really good Scarf mod, good revenge killer. And basically, it does the exact same job as this Bundle, this Leaves, this mod, but adds these two do stab combos, this Rock and Fighting type, which it deals with all of the sort of bulky steals like Asui and Kucha, which would try to deal with Bundle, deal with Leaves and Moth all in one slot. This Tracheon could just destroy those. Mega Dino and Glalie, neither great, but they can be used, they have decent utility. The only issue I have with this team really is that it's super ground weak. Your only ground immunity is Moltres, you have Iron Leaves as a resist. But you're gonna have a lot of trouble switching into those if they, something like Great Tusk might use Stone Edge, might use Knockoff. And basically you might be forced to bring Moltres basically every single round, or else you lose to every ground type, even if it's not particularly good in that matchup. So you need to be careful around those ground types, and also water types versus something like Rain, Swift Swim, Swampert, Barraskewda. Those can absolutely demolish you. Any sort of fast water types. And bulky water types to also pose a bit of an issue versus you. They kind of deal with Bundle. You have to predict with Freeze Dry. They deal with Treads, Moth. So you're gonna need to get a few predicts right into those bulky waters, into those offensive waters, in order to break past them and just win the game. Next is Rain, but it's a very unique Rain. I don't see Rain typically like this very often. It's like some bulky offense, balance mixed in, and it doesn't need rain to, like I said, it's not fully spec'd into rain. You don't need to bring rain every single round, and I like that about this team. Rillaboom, Ogerpon, basically all of these things can function without rain. Guard can too, Swampert, this doesn't have to Mega, this can too. So really everything here does not need rain to function, but you can bring rain just to boost this Swampert. Get Thunders off of Raikou, which is really cool, I think. And this team has lots of bulk, lots of potential, but an issue I see with this team is one, your only Ice Switch in is Registeel, and Registeel has no recovery. It won't be able to survive that onslaught from something like Bundle. If you do have the rain, it won't be able to take those Hydro Pumps in the rain. One more thing I would have liked to see from this team is I see it as Porygon 2, which is a great pivot. That's kind of abusable. I would like to see at least one sort of mon that can abuse Trick Room for it, so that team sort of has different modes. They can swap between Trick Room, sort of grassy terrain offense, and rain, which would put your opponents in sort of tougher spot prepping. Next, starting off, obviously Mega Medicross is one of the strongest mons we have available. I think it's probably the second strongest mon we have here, better than Mega Alakazam. Combine that with their Shifu single, and it makes an incredibly great core. When there's no switching into either of these two combined, that's really hard. But also, our Shifu is a mon that baits these fairy moves, and right next to it you have Claw Tower, you have Steel, you have basically one of the most offensive poisons in the game, and you have one of the strongest steel types in the game, and that makes an amazing group pairing with this Urshifu, where those fairy types that try to stop your Urshifu won't be able to stand a chance here. Yeah, with Primarina, a great, it could run a pivot set, Calm Mind, Choice. Primarina is just really good with this sort of team. The Gouging Fire 2 is a great setup sweeper to complement these two wall breakers. But after that is where I kind of see the problems with this team, is that you don't have any sort of defensive pivot with recovery or anything. You don't have something like a Lolamola, like Mandibuzz, and you're basically going to have so much trouble switching in these ground moves, especially because your 3 resists here aren't the greatest ground resist. Torterra can take a few hits, or Choreo, but any strong ground type attacker with any coverage can just basically bowl through these. In addition to that, like, you have these webs, but you don't have any sort of spin blocker, so the webs kind of feel sort of wasted on this team, or Choreo is not gonna it's not gonna be the best spin blocker. It's not gonna do its full job here. I feel like you have this Cloud Tower with all these hazards, you have these you have this Rabompi, and you have these amazing wall breakers, but you don't have a way to get them in very easily other than Flip Turret on Primarina, which is going to get worn down. You don't have any way to keep the hazards up, which is my main problem with this team. But it's still going to be very impossible to switch into these two. It's going to be very hard to keep up offensively with this this Dragon Dance Gouging Fire 2 in the back with this Chill Smash Torterra. Even this Phalanx can put in a lot of work here, but I think it's kind of overlapping with this Urshifu a lot as this very strong fighting type wall breaker. Because obviously Urshifu can run out Sword Dance, can run Bulk Up, and kind of finds itself being a better version of Phalanx a lot of the time. Next is my team, and yeah, it's Mono Dragon. I didn't really expect to get Dragapult and Naganadel, but I did, so hooray for me. These are the 4 most important mons for me to get, in my opinion. Dragapult, Naganadel, very fast, offensive pressure mons. They have a large variety of sets. Naganadel has, of course, both hazards to pressure any sort of special walls to try to beat it down. Dragapult has basically infinite sets it can run. Hydreigon 2 super versatile. Rocks, Roost, Defog is it's the best utility mod I have here, and one of the best Ghosts I have on my team. And Gujarazui is like the only good Moonblast switch in on Mono Dragon. Other than that, there isn't too much to say about this team. I think it's super threatening offensively. It has decent options for removal and sitting hazards. Of course, defensively, you just throw off Dragon type moves, you throw off Ice type moves especially. Some Fairy type moves will work too. Then you're just going to be wearing this team down. just don't focus on playing against this team too defensively. Focus on attacking, and keeping the momentum for yourself. Next up, we have this pretty offensive team here with this sort of electric train-ish team with the Iron Crown, with the Iron Valiant, and the Pink Urchin. And already we see very strong both offensive and defensive presences. All of these mons here have very great natural bulk. They can live hits, they can set up. They can also be great choice users like Jirachi Val, Kartana, Latios. All of these can be amazing both revenge killers, wall breakers, or even setup sweepers. This makes this team extremely variable both offensively and defensively. It's super flexible, you can run whatever you want, all of these mons. Crewbats, great U-turn, spin, defogger, Braper, whatever you want to run with it. Tentacruel's a great spinner too, has lots of hazards. Obviously these three have great hazard potential in terms of setting up spikes and toxic spikes. Jirachi can set up stealth rocks. And this team is just going to be very threatening offensively to deal with and even to break through. Just look at these speed tiers up here, you get 130 all the way down to 100. It's going to be tough to outspeed these mons too. And I think a lot of the games with this are going to come down to actually just skill. Whoever brings the best sets, whoever plays the best. Because this team isn't necessarily amazing, but it isn't really bad in its own right either. But this team does have a few problems I want to point out. One, these three bonds have great hazard setting potential, but there's no actual spin blocker. There's no way to make sure you keep those hazards up versus teams which might hate them, which is a big issue. Two, you have zero ghost resist, so ghost mons will be able to just spam Shadow Ball. And lastly, speed tiers for this team just fall off right after 100. You can see they're just base like 35 after that. It just because a couple mons aren't shown here, Raging Bolt and Iron Crown. But anything under that, essentially, if you have mons that can't outspeed this Jirachi, you're going to be able to run a lot of bulk and just be able to get away with it now because you don't have great speed tiers. And something like Urshifu now can run a lot of HP. It might be able to live like one more Leaf Blade, one more Sacred Sword from its Kartana, even after it took Spike Chip or something. And that's definitely something to watch out for when drafting your teams. I feel like making sure you have a good speed gradient is very important for keeping opponents in check and making sure their team building is a lot tougher than it should be. Next up, we have Psychic Terrain. And Psychic Terrain's a very fun, very interesting playstyle. I've played it before, but like I've said earlier, I don't like spiking extremely hard into Psychic Terrain. The team I had before had Lele, had a Spot Sure. I believe it had Blaze too. It had Poltergeist. It also had a lot of really strong defensive mons. It had Mandibuzz, Iron Treads, Buzzwole. Had great offensive and defensive potential, so that if I didn't want to bring super hard Psychic Terrain once, I didn't have to. I think that's a problem this team has, where these two bonds really like Psychic Terrain, these like Psychic Terrain, this like Psychic Terrain, this like Psychic Terrain, and this also likes Psychic Terrain. All of these bonds here are pretty fast and frail and really hate priority and want Psychic Terrain to be up. And versus a team which can just get rid of that Psychic Terrain like Tapu Koko, Tapu Fini, Boom, whatever, this team's going to have a lot of trouble with already. The other problem I have with this team is the hazards weakness. You have Taunt, you have Magic Bounce, but once they go up, I think Articuno has Defog, but your team is super weak to hazards. Lele's speed, every single mon here absolutely despises, except Golurk, absolutely despises taking chip from those stealth rocks, and not even to mention toxic spikes will just demolish this team. This makes they can outlast you defensively. I think are two of the biggest flaws with this team. But offensively is where this team shines again. In Psychic Terrain, this speed is going to be extremely hard to deal with the expanding floors. This Blaze can snowball out of control. Ogerpon and Darm can be extremely fast, extremely strong, like Gyarados can D-Dance. You can't even count out Articuno. So they can just come on, you can recover, it can store power, it can beat your whole team. So I think when you're playing this team versus this team, it's more likely to be relying on a bunch of sashes, just keep those hazards off. I think playing versus the team, you're gonna want to try to get rid of this hat, you're gonna want to try to get hazards up, and you could just demolish this team. But if you're playing this team, If you keep those hazards off, you get your sashes intact. Something like Blaze with a sash can absolutely demolish would-be checks. Like can Gambit, like with an AV, you could live a hit from your Fire Blast. All of a sudden you could Tau, and then this Blaze lives, and they can Fire Blast again, gets a beast boost, and it wins the game. So I think games with these are going to be extremely methodical, kind of like chess, and you're going to want to make sure that you keep all your key components alive. Lastly, we have Iape, King Gambit. You see all of these things are, you get threats in their own rights. Only 8 members, so that's like the minimum. Only 8 good ones. There's Eevee there, but I don't expect that to do much. Yeah, you never know. But all 8 of these are extremely powerful mons, high pointers. The lowest one I think is Incineroar, but Incineroar is still pretty good in its own right. Very versatile. And this team is just very threatening both offensively and defensively, because you have really good pivots, like basically all of these 4 are great pivot mons. You have some extremely strong both sweepers and wall breakers in these 4. And this team is just going to be a lot of balance, a lot of bulky offense. And if you like playing that, this team's going to be very powerful for you. I do have a few issues with this team, is mainly the speed. The speed's a bit lacking. You're going to be reliant on choice mons a lot. And 2, this team is pretty weak to hazard toxic spikes in general. There's no grounded poison to absorb it. All of these mons will not like getting hit by T-spikes. But other than that, like, this team is very solid. It has switch-ins for basically anything in the game. With this very amazing Fairy Steel Dragon Core right here. Altaria filling both slots. And 2 great steals, Gambit and Polion. Also, this team is a bit weak to ground moves, but Zapdos and Ogerpon can sort of deal with those, and Pre-Mega Altaria can also do that. And one last thing that I will mention, this team is kind of weak and kind of lacking. That doesn't have great hazards. It has rocks on Empoleon, and I think Blood Moon might have rocks, might not, but that's about it. Iape also has rocks, but that won't be wanting to run it a lot either. Gambit too. So versus kind of hazard stack teams, you won't be able to get up your own hazards, and if they have something like Spadef Gold, which can wall your Zapdos, you can have trouble getting those off. And then you're kind of going to crumple to teams like Silver, which can just get up all their hazards versus you, and you're going to need a way to kind of prevent that. And also, I think having a lot of hazards on this team would be really cool, very helpful, because you have, of course, competitive Empoleon and Defiant on Iape, which can really punish use of Defog. Defiant on King Gambit too, you kind of monopolized and stole all of the Defog punishers. You don't have any way to actually force them to run Defog, which is kind of tough. You do have a great spin blocker in an Iape, so that's something. And I really like the offensive potential of this team mixed with the sort of bouncy defensive pivots here. And, well, that's all the teams. Again, I think probably my favorite teams here, my picks to win, are this team over here by Pick and this team by GrunkelCon. I think they're probably my favorites, but other than that, a lot of these teams here have great potential to win. I think no team is that much better than another. Everyone can beat each other. For instance, I think Silver has an amazing team. Vessel 2, Morpher. They're some of the strongest teams that I've seen in draft. So that's about it.